Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video I'll be showing you how I made this wide leg jumper with a Peter Pan collar and ruffled sleeves for my baby girl. If you're interested in how I achieved this look, please stay tuned. Alright guys, let's get started. I'll be using 1 yard of this lightweight flowy cotton knit fabric with flower print. And because it's a bit see-through, I'll be using 1 yard of this off-white cotton knit fabric for the lining, and I also have some elastic. I have a toddler t-shirt and a pair of toddler pants I'll be using to make the patterns. First, I measure how far down from the neckline where I want the waistband to cinch in. This is where the elastic will be placed. Then I fold the t-shirt up from the bottom at that point. Then I fold it in half again long ways. Starting from the back neckline, I trace down the fold. To measure the length across the bottom, I use a measurement around my daughter's waist, 20 inches. Divide that by 4, which gives me 5 inches. Then I add 2 more inches to that and trace across 7 inches. From there I continue tracing around the shirt from that 7-inch point. I use my seam ripper to poke through and indicate the arm seam onto the craft paper. I continue tracing around the shoulder and the top of the back neckline. I use my curved ruler to connect the armhole to close the 2-inch gap. I keep the shirt folded as is, and this time I trace around the same way, starting from the front neckline. Next, I fold the pants in half to the back. I trace down the straight edge of the pants. I trace 7 inches across the waistband, the same length as the waistline of the top. I place the end of the waistband at that 7-inch point. Then I continue tracing down the curve. When I get to the crotch point, I trace straight down to widen the leg of the pant, then trace straight across the bottom. Here's a pant pattern that is made to be cut on the fold. I added my 1/2 inch seam allowance and 2 extra inches to the bottom to make them longer. I added 2 inches to the top waistline, then another 1 inch for the seam allowance. Again, I cut this on the fold twice for the front and the back. Here's the front and back patterns. The front pattern will be cut once on the fold. The back pattern will be cut into 2 separate pieces with the 1-inch seam allowance added to the straight edge. I've also added a 1-inch seam allowance to the bottom of the waistline. I cut the patterns out onto fabric and the lining. Then I take the front and back top pieces and line the shoulders together, right sides facing in. Then I sew across the shoulders with a straight stitch. After attaching the shoulders together, I prepare the Peter Pan collar. To do that, I grab my craft paper and fold the top in half, making sure to line the shoulder seams together so that 1/2 of the front and back neckline is laid flat on top of the craft paper. I trace along the curve and straighten out that line with my curved ruler. I measure 2.5 inches wide along the curve, then I connect those points and draw the curve by freehand. At the top end of the curve, I measure 1 inch in and draw a straight line across that point. I round the bottom corner with my curved ruler and remove the unneeded markings. After adding my 1/2 inch seam allowance, I realized I forgot to round off the bottom corner on the other end. So I go ahead and round that bottom corner, remove the unneeded markings, and adjust the seam allowance. Then I go ahead and cut that out. I use this pattern to cut 4 pieces total for 2 pieces on each side of the shirt. I sew them together starting from the straight edge across the top, then along the curve with a straight stitch. With both pieces attached, I cut the excess seam allowance off, turn them right side out, and give them a quick press. Now that I've prepared my collar, I set them aside until I'm ready to use them. For the ruffle sleeve, I have 2 rectangular pieces cut. For the length, I measure along the armhole and add 5 inches. For me, that measured out to 17 inches for the length at 5.5 inches wide. I line the bottom pieces right side spacing in, then fold them in half. At the top left corner, I measure a 1/2 inch across and mark at that point. Then I measure a 1/2 inch up at the bottom right corner and mark at that point. I connect those 2 points with my curved ruler, then trace and cut along that curve. When that's done, I fold in twice 1/4 of an inch to hem along the curve edge and sew across with a straight stitch for both pieces. Here's the hemmed curve, and I also add a base stitch on the straight edge of the sleeves for gathering. I grab the flower print top and continue gathering the sleeves to my liking. I line and pin the center point of the sleeve and the shoulder seams together, right sides facing in. I pin the ends of the sleeves about 1.5 inches in from both ends of the armhole and continue pinning the rest of the sleeve onto the armhole. After pinning both sleeves, I remove any loose thread, then I place the lining on top right side down and line and pin the armholes together. I sew across the curve with a straight stitch. When the armholes are attached, I cut off about 1/4 of the seam allowance and cut small slits along the curve, making sure not to cut through the stitch. I turn the top right side out. Then I take the sleeves, roll them in and pin them out of the way onto the flower print layer only. After the sleeves are pinned out of the way from the neckline, I take both sides of the collar and pin both ends at the center point of the front neckline of the flower top only. When both sides of the collar are pinned in place, I flip the top right side out, making sure the lining is right side down over the collar and the flower print top. I sew together, starting from the end of one side of the back opening, around the curve of the neckline, then across the other side of the back opening with a straight stitch. I cut 1/4 of the excess seam allowance off and cut small slits above the stitch along the curve of the neckline. I carefully remove the pins off the sleeve from the inside of the top, then I turn the top right side out by pulling the back opening through the lining and flower shoulders. Now you can see the collar and the sleeves fully installed. Here's the front of the top, and here's the back opening that overlap onto each other about 1/2 inch. Next, I'll attach the buttons and the buttonholes. I prepare my button with the attachment by inserting the button of my choice and attach that to the sewing machine. On one side of the opening, I measure in 2-inch increments starting from the top neckline and mark at each point. Then I sew a buttonhole at each point for a total of 4 buttonholes. I carefully cut open each buttonhole with my seam ripper, making sure to not cut through the stitches. I overlap the back opening with the buttonholes on top and mark at the center point of each hole onto the other side of the opening. Then I sew each button at those 4 points. When the buttons are attached, I button the opening together. At the bottom of the opening, I sew it closed about 1.5 inches from the bottom with a straight stitch. Now that the back of the shirt is complete, I set the top aside for now. I grab both pieces of the pants and the lining and fold them right sides in, lining the inner seams together, and sew together with a straight stitch. Just to note, I made the lining 6 inches long from the crotch point, just enough for coverage and to keep as much of the flowiness of the pant as I could. Next, I turn the pant pieces right side out. Then I line and pin the inner seams together and continue pinning the front and back sides together. I sew across with a straight stitch. After attaching the legs of the pant and lining together, with the lining hemmed at the bottom, I turn the lining wrong side out and insert them into the flower print bottoms. I line and pin the front and back seams together as well. I give that a quick press. When that's done, I grab the top of the jumper and turn it wrong side out and line the bottom of the raw edge with the top raw edge of the pants. I mark the bottom edge of the top at both end points of the pant. I sew the sides of the top together at those 2 points with a straight stitch. After attaching the sides, I insert the pants inside of the top, pulling the legs through the armhole, right sides facing in. Then I pin both ends of the pant at the waistline with the side seams of the top waistline together. Then I pin the front and back center point together as well. With the raw ends lined together, I sew around the waistline 1 inch from the raw ends with a straight stitch. After attaching the top and the bottom, I turn the jumper wrong side out and unbutton the back. With the 1 inch seam allowance flap turned downward, I sew along the end of that seam allowance around the waistline to make a casing for the elastic. I leave a 1 inch opening for the elastic to be inserted. Here I have the casing around the waistline for the elastic prepared with the 1 inch opening. For the elastic, I measure and cut the exact length around my daughter's waistline, which is 20 inches. I take a safety pin and attach it to one end of the elastic. I insert the safety pin into one side of the opening, then pull and push the elastic through the casing to the other side of the opening. Then I overlap the end of the elastic a 1/2 inch and sew them together with a zigzag stitch. After sewing the ends of the elastic together, I distribute the elastic evenly throughout the waistline and sew that 1 inch opening closed with a straight stitch. Now the elastic is installed and the waistband is complete. Lastly, I hem the bottom of the pants, and now the jumper is complete. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know when there's a new upload. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!